Good evening and welcome to Mello TV. I'm your host, Nicole Hales. Thank you for joining us for another evening that promised to reveal interesting set of revelations and findings. Joining the discussion is renowned and credible pollster Bill Johnson. Also joining us tonight to analyze the findings is political analyst Paul Bourne. The public's views on the government's use of states of emergency as a crime-fighting tool and the possibility of the reintroduction of the death penalty and hanging of criminals who murder people. Good evening, gentlemen, and thanks for joining us.
Good evening.
According to police crime statistics, 112 people were murdered in Jamaica over the first 23 days of this year. That's 2022. This is 15 more homicides, or 15.5% increase when compared to the corresponding period in 2021. The St. James Police Division leads the murder count with 21 cases, a 16.7% increase compared to 18 homicides reported in the division up to January 23 last year, and that number has increased. Bill, we're starting the year with some dire statistics as it pertains to crime. We polled Jamaicans on the question of whether or not they agree with the government declaring states of emergency to fight crime. What are those numbers showing?
Yes, an overwhelming majority of 2/3 of the citizens of Jamaica support the government's efforts to declare states of emergency to fight crime. 29% disagree. 5% are unsure. The strong support is across all political lines. JLP supporters are 69% in agreement with the policy. Only 27% disagree with it. PNP supporters are 52% in favor of the policy, 44% disagree with it, and 68% of those who didn't vote are in favor of it, compared to 26% who disagree. Now, it should be pointed out that the PNP voters are going against their party's own policy positions on this issue with their majority of support for it. And there are also strong majorities of people who agree in all demographic groups across the country. So it's an overwhelming feeling of agreement with the government's policy of declaring states of emergency.
Let's hear what Prime Minister Holness has to say regarding the use of states of emergencies.
The zones of special operations is a legislative tool designed to intervene in circumstances where geographically defined, usually in a limited way, less than a parish, communities have been captured by criminal elements. The communities that we have targeted so far for this kind of intervention are communities with clearly defined infrastructure that allows the police force to put in place certain static and dynamic strategies, such as to set up controls of ingress and egress, conduct searches, and do public order policing. So far, I think we can all agree that the zones of special operations, where they have been implemented, have worked. We initially designed the plan to target the top 20 communities that were plagued with crime and violence in an increasing way, particularly murders, shootings, and gang-related activities. These communities, we now have 5 zones of special operations that have been so far implemented. And as I said, generally, they have been successful. Nothing is perfect, we will admit, and we do have concerns regarding the operation of one particular zone of special operations, which we intend to review in the near future. So the zones of special operations, therefore, are designed as a community building tool.
Minister of National Security, Peter Bunting said in a recent press conference regarding his use of the constitutional rights of SOEs.
2011, the most fundamental amendment to our independence constitution took place when Parliament passed the amendment including the new Charter of Rights in our constitution. That Charter of Rights changed fundamentally how a state of emergency is treated with in Parliament. Up until that time, all that was needed to extend the state of emergency was a simple majority. And the JLP administration insisted that that should be changed to require a 2/3 majority of both houses. That added an additional check and balance responsibility to the opposition. Even if they did not have the sufficient numbers in the House to prevent the 2/3 majority, the government would always need the cooperation of at least one senator in the upper house. No government could be required to routinely need the day-to-day cooperation of an opposition in order to function properly. So that design made it very clear that it was only in very exceptional circumstances that this should be used. Nothing contemplated the serial and routine use of states of emergency as a crime-fighting tool.
Paul, let's bring you in here. There's a vast difference between the use of SOEs between the government's position and that of the opposition. What's your take on this?
Well, it's clear from an empirical perspective, and I've done research on it. It has been revealed that the state of emergency works. All right, so we want to establish that. So despite what people are saying, it works. Now, what we can look at is the prolonged state of emergency will not work if that's the only thing. But the Prime Minister alludes to some stuff. He said that the state of emergency has some intricate measures inside of it that, when rolled out or when actually instituted, will actually deal with and substantially reduce the crime. And if you look at what people are saying here, 66% of Jamaicans, not PNP or JLP, Jamaicans indicated that the bill of state of emergency works or agree with the government position on state of emergency. What you can see from the figures, even those who are PNP supporters who voted in the last election are saying by majority, 56% said, listen, we agree with the government reintroducing even some other stuff to ensure that they deal with the state of emergency because they see that the state of emergency works. What the problem is a prolonged state of emergency only where the problem is, and not that the state of emergency works or it doesn't work.
Well, Prime Minister Holness says the states of emergencies have worked without question. Here are some more comments from him addressing a recent press conference.
I want the country to bear in mind that this is a long-term strategy. Yes, when we do intervene in the communities, you see an immediate reduction in violence. The gangs disperse, the criminals leave the area, they cannot return to conduct their criminal activities. But it is more than that. It is more than a displacement strategy. It is a strategy to harden the area against the return and re-institutionalization of criminality in the communities. So we are building peace in the community. We are building people who will become wardens of the peace. We're giving people opportunity to become employed. We are improving the environment and conditions of the community, particularly garbage collection and improving their built environment, removal of zinc fences, putting in sewage where none existed before, ensuring that water and electricity are regularized. And we believe that this nexus between the security operation and the community development operation will ensure that these communities will sustain the peace for a long period of time. You can imagine that this is therefore a resource-intense activity. It has worked, without question. in the initial stages, persons were skeptical. But we are now here today seeing everyone calling for the implementation of a zone of special operation in their communities.
Opposition leader and party president of the PNP, Mark Golding, classified the SOE as a failed crime-fighting strategy.
We feel it is a failed strategy. It has been used over a 3-year period from 2017 to 2020. It did not achieve any lasting improvements in Jamaica's national security situation. To the contrary, we have continued to see elevated levels of violent crime, and in particular murders, over that period. Furthermore, it has weakened, in my opinion, the crime-fighting and prosecutorial aspects of law enforcement, because it has inculcated in the security forces a culture that says you can just go and detain somebody and hold them without any recourse to the courts, and therefore the important tasks of police to investigate cases properly, prepare cases for prosecution, and bring prosecutions to the court, which can result in convictions of violent criminals, have not been happening in the numbers that they should be. And that is the source of our problem. We need to get back to a situation where investigative techniques and investigations are properly conducted, so we have viable prosecutions and we send the criminals to prison. We support legislation that will enable the security forces to go about their business more effectively. We introduced a DNA evidence law, which has enabled DNA evidence to be used to secure prosecutions. We amended the Evidence Act to facilitate computer-generated evidence, all of the evidence through the Jamaica Eye system, to be used to effectively prosecute people in court. We brought the anti-gang legislation, which is now having a great effect, and we have supported the government's attempt to further strengthen it.
Paul, there seems to be a disparity between the socioeconomic groups as to whether who wants the use or the continuation of the SOEs. On the lower spectrum of the socioeconomic ladder, persons who are directly affected by crime, they want the government and the police to continue the SOEs, while those persons who aren't directly affected by crime, they are pushing for the discontinuation of the use of these states of emergency. Your thoughts on the grave disparity?
The answer is simple. It's as clear as day, in the sense that if you are not affected, why do you want it to continue? But let's look at some fundamental stuff here, and the Prime Minister spoke to them to say, okay then, and which I support in terms of research, that when the state of emergency is introduced, immediately there's a reduction in crime. So those who are in crime-riddled areas, which are normally the lower socioeconomic status individuals, would want to see the SOE being introduced, because immediately they will see a reduction in crime. The Prime Minister spoke to it, that a number of these gang leaders and individuals dispersed other communities, and that is the problem. If they disperse, that does not mean they're actually away totally from the situation, and all that is required to be done is that after the SOE has been there for a prolonged period and the security forces become comfortable, then these individuals move back into the community and create a problem. But I disagree with the opposition leader to say that the state of emergency does not work. It does not work in its long period, which is understandable, because when the state of emergency is actually there for a long time, these individuals actually reintegrate themselves into society and create problems. What I would say to the Prime Minister is that look at how we address some fundamental in society. Jamaica is critically, let me rephrase that. There's a critical inequity in terms of income in Jamaica, and that is creating the problem. Where a number of these guys are involved in that, anthropological studies have been done and ethnographic studies have been done to say why a number of persons become involved in crime. And there is enough evidence to say that we need to structure Jamaica in a different way to get things done. Now, where we introduce state of emergency in the short term, that will hold things. Other things need to be addressed to get Jamaica out of where it is. Look at those persons who are getting involved in crimes and look how they lose their lives. Wantonly. What do they want? They want a little of the pie. What do I mean by that? A little something in life. They are unable to get some things in life through the normal system. So therefore they become involved in crime, and they may get a house or a car, and that's not anything that lasts for a long period. But they want something as well. If a society is structured in which there's inequity, injustice in the system, then SOE in every area will not work.
Paul, still looking at the empirical data as it pertains to the SOEs, a poll conducted in January of 2019, 83% of persons polled agreed and 13% disagreed. Is the PNP out of touch with the reality of the people? And what is the JLP getting wrong in convincing the PNP to support the use of the SOEs?
I don't think the JLP has gotten anything wrong. The JLP is doing what it is doing. But I think the leader of the leaders, that is including Mr. Bunting as well as the Mark Golding, I think they have gotten something wrong. And what they have gotten wrong, they are saying that the SOEs don't work. And what they need to do is to look at it in terms of when the SOE is introduced, what happens? Then when the SOE has been introduced for a 6-month period, a 3-month period, a 1-year period, what happens? Because those persons who are on the ground are saying the thing works, but it works only for a short time. What is actually happening and what is crippling the effectiveness of the SOE are the social intervention programs to get the youth involved in meaningful and economic activities. That is what is lacking. Merely actually removing zinc fence, deal with sewage, deal with garbage, is not going to work for people in this 21st century. People need more than that. Their children ought to go to school. The cost of living has been increasing and continues to increase. How are they going to support their families? It's a simple mathematics. If you put a dog, or let me rephrase that. If you have a pet dog that is, and the dog is not being fed and opportunities are held from the dog, and you're putting the dog in a situation where he's forced to defend himself, he will, even though he's a pet. And that operates as well with humans. If we are depriving the humans of mere existence, they are going to have to steal. They are going to have to kill. It is just as simple as that. So the SOE for a prolonged period of time will not work because other things will be placed on the table.
Central Kingston is one such hotspot for crime and rising murder rates in particular. Recently, National Security Minister Dr. Horace Chang pointed out the work that has been done by the security forces to get the country's crime problem under control. Here's what he had to say.
Response to gang-related violence within Central Kingston, specifically over the last 12 months in particular, the police intensified and expanded their operations. Search, curfew and searches, intelligence-driven activities, operations, and assignment of additional special operation teams within the area, taking place on a most intensive basis in Central Kingston. As a result of the intensive activity, several gang leaders have been apprehended or in custody. Several migrated, and even in their new jurisdiction, they have been killing their fellow gang members. Intelligence here suggests that in spite of some degrading of the gangs, as a result of intense police action, there is need for further action within Central Kingston. The situation in Central Kingston demands special security measures. The clear hold and build strategy of the zones of special operation is one such tool that can be used not only to reduce the immediate homicide rate, but to provide a basis for community transformation, as this is one of the communities identified over time as one that requires special social investment. It is not a replacement for a state of public emergency. The suite of development interventions that are made available under the zone of special operation is designed to bring about social transformation and prevent and reduce not only the criminal violence in there, which is near anarchic, but restore a sense of normalcy and safety to the community within that space. It's one of the tools that the government is using to restore law and order in Central Kingston and across several communities in Jamaica. The government has been clear that we are not relying on any one tool to secure Jamaica. We will utilize all available tools to restore order, public safety, and remove violence from communities. Legislative, as well as security measures.
Shadow Minister Peter Bunting says the government has failed immensely on the issue of crime.
The government has continued with really what I refer to as a big lie, or perhaps could also be described as a false dilemma. They make it seem that if you want to have police and soldiers in your communities, in the communities where crimes are spiking, that you must have an SOE to do so. That is not true. Every single day of the year for the last 4 decades probably, the military has been deployed in support of policing right across Jamaica. It was the case when I was minister in the 2012 to 2015 period. It was the case for my predecessors, and it is the case now. So this sudden requirement that you have these states of emergency is a fiction. It is not true. It is not necessary. There are adequate powers in ordinary legislation, adequate provisions in ordinary legislation for that to occur. And therefore, we will not be assisting the government in perpetuating this fallacy, perpetuating this fiction, which is really an attempt to cover up their failure. After almost 6 years, they have failed abysmally. They have failed notwithstanding immense resources relative to any previous administration to deal with national security. And what we're seeing now is just an excuse and trying to shift blame to the opposition for their failures in this area. Thank you.
Bill, in a poll conducted in January of 2019, 83% agreed and 13% disagreed with the use of the states of emergency. Break down these figures for us.
So, but one of the things that we did in that poll, we had enhanced samples in 3 areas where states of emergency had been declared. And it was amazing. The support for the state of emergency was overwhelming in each of these 3 areas. It was even more, it was even supported more than across the country as a whole. So I really think that, people should look at these states of emergencies and, give them some serious thought, because the people who are affected like them, and the people nationally who are going to be affected by it in terms of crime certainly are supportive of them by a 2/3 margin.
Paul, talk to us. Is the opposition out of touch with the reality of the people, especially those that support the party?
Before I answer your question, I'll contextualize something for the opposition. I did a study bit using data from 1970 to 2019, homicide data, and look at it, break it down in terms of period in which the particular party was in power, whether the PNP or the JLP, and found that statistically over 69-year period, average murders remain the same. So whether it's the PNP is in power or the JLP in power, is on average statistically, murders are the same. So I want to contextualize that for the People's National Party and by extension the opposition. So, but what is for certain inside of here is it's clear that the People's National Party is somewhat in some euphoric state where they do not seem to understand what is really happening with murders, with crime. Now, I am off here with ear of Central Kingston because I've had an opportunity of living there on certain time in my life. And what is certain is that whenever the police comes into these areas are around, it's highly likely that something don't occur. All right? Most time when the police are gone or disappear for a few seconds, anarchy breaks loose because they are gone. And I'm sure Mr. Bunting is aware of that. I'm sure Mark Golden is aware of that. But what I concur with them on is prolonged state of emergency will not address the problem that we're having in Jamaica. Because let's go back to some fundamental thing. We have seen even as far as when, way back now, when Claudia Mossop and those guys were killed. They were killed. Where are we today? Worse off than then. So it means that clearly something is going on in these areas. But let's look why some people in these areas really clamoring for a state of emergency as other people are not. Those in the affluent areas have air-conditioned houses, security guards, nothing is happening in their areas. So they're fine. They don't need state of emergency. But those in these crime-riddled areas, what they have? Gunshot, murders, crime, all different sort of crime, rape, all of that occurring in these areas. So they want reprieve. They want some form of quiet, some form of sanity inside their state of consciousness. So they really want a solution to the problem. Temporarily, a state of emergency is that reprieve. But we need to address some long-term issues to deal with some problems that are happening in Jamaica. When you look at Derek Morgan, a sociologist, he did a study between in the 80s up to 1983, and he found the level of inequality in Jamaica has been high. I continued that study and found up to 2020. This level of inequality in Jamaica is about the same compared to the 80s. What has happened between the 80s and now? Inflation has actually gone up. Cost of living has gone up. Unemployment has gone up. And what is happening to the people? They are struggling, suffering in these areas. A state of emergency, as I said before, is a primary relief. And the shadow minister, Peter Bunting, is fully aware of that. Despite what he wants to say, Mark Golden knows that when a state of emergency happens in his area, he sees a reduction in crime. But with a prolonged state of emergency, we're having this outbreak just the same, because other things must be addressed, and they are not being addressed in Jamaica.
We went on the streets today to hear what the public had to say about the use of states of emergency and the death penalty.
Yes, in some way to me it helps crime. Well, on the other hand, I think sometimes it depends on how we deal with it, to deal with crime, because most time you have to have a good plan to deal with it, because normally the state of emergency, you need some other technical ways, because when you go to say it's going to do it, I think most people realize that it is going to happen, so they try to, get away from that area, so whatever the system is. But I think it helps in some ways. We are all human, and I don't really believe in the hanging. But on the other hand, I think we need to implement more jobs for the young people so that the murder case will go down.
I do agree with it. However, I think the police or soldiers should be doing their jobs and not frolicking with females in the community. Because if they're actually doing their job, I think they should go around, check RTR, just do checks, not just sit down at one point. So I think they can improve that. And this has to do with the capital punishment. I do think that we need to implement it. Too much murder is going on, and I think that will help, because it will put fear in a lot of them mind to say, what, if I'm found guilty, I will be sentenced to death. So I think it would help.
Honestly, all crime are moved now. It helped somewhat, but not totally, because crime itself starts from the police itself. So until them clear crime with the police, the country is not going to be in a safe state, no matter what them call. So in some cases, we'd have to say no, because a lot of these murders aren't proven as yet, so a lot of innocent people are still in prison. But once it's a proven murder and you have 100% proof, yes. I mean, some of these criminals really don't deserve to be able to come back on the road, because a lot of them go in and then tomorrow you hear that they're out again. And that is one of the reasons crime doesn't go down in this country as well. So capital punishment in most cases can come back once it's a proven case?
Basically, it in between. It help and it sometimes not help. These criminals are taking innocent people's life who don't deserve it, so they deserve to be hung.
Bill, on the question of whether or not the public agree or disagree that the government should reintroduce the death penalty and start hanging criminals who murder people, what are those figures showing?
Okay, but by better than a 2-to-1 majority, 64% to 28%, the Jamaican people believe that the government should reintroduce the death penalty and start hanging criminals who murder people. There are strong majorities who agree with this in all political and demographic groups. Once again, if you look by political party, 70% of the JLP voters agree, 25% disagree. Among the PNP, 56% agree, 35% disagree, and those who didn't vote at 64% to 27%. So there's just an overwhelming majority that people have just had it, and they really think that the death penalty should be reintroduced here in Jamaica.
Paul, before we go, does the country need a bipartisan approach to tackle the issue of crime, and what are your final thoughts?
I think to resort to hanging is an archaic position, but something has to be done in terms of looking at how we address the matter relating to crime. And I'm forwarding that crime is a structural issue. It is endemic inside all the structure of the Jamaican society. And we go back to even how Kingston was started, and we can look at Simon's work and Si's work in terms of what they have actually said inside of Harriet's book. You realize that how people emerged in Jamaica, even to get a mere income, a mere survival, has been a struggling and difficult one. It is so difficult for many Jamaicans to survive that if we were to reintroduce the death penalty, we may kill off 3/4 of the population, because 3/4 of the population is actually suffering, and people need to survive. In order for them to survive, and when there's no opportunities for them, they are going to do things that are on towards the structure, on towards the system. So within that context, we have to look at how we structurally deal with the matter relating to crime. The society is saying introduce the death penalty only because they are frustrated, downright frustrated. So whether it's a PNP or the JLP, somebody needs to actually get these two camps together and look at where we are as a society. We need to solve the crime problem. And because we need to solve the crime problem, let's move from who is PNP and who is JLP and have people's lives been preserved. And that is exactly what people are saying in terms of the numbers. 64% of persons are saying, listen, reintroduce death penalty. 56% of those who supported the People's National Party, 56 and 64% of those who did not vote. People are just tired, and they are looking for some hope, some reprieve. So all I'm actually forwarding, the opposition and the current government need to look at what the people are saying. They need solution.
Bill, strong empirical data being presented tonight. Come tomorrow, what can we expect?
Okay, well, when we did our last survey 18 months ago, the Prime Minister's numbers, both favorable numbers and approval numbers, were in the stratosphere. Tomorrow we'll look and see if these numbers have remained in the stratosphere or if they've started to come back down to earth. So it'll be a very, very interesting program tomorrow.
There you have it. Join us tomorrow and every weekday until February 25 to get the answers to many more important questions during the Mello TV Bill Johnson poll, and also listen to Mello FM and Rhythm FM newscasts for the recap. I want to thank this evening's guests, pollster Bill Johnson and political analyst Paul Bourne. I'm Nicole Hales on behalf of the entire production team. Thanks for watching.